So we're on our third webinar of our series. Today is a longer one. So first up, we've got Bia talking about culture and values. So our 3 sessions this week will really be focused around you, your people, and how you work together as we navigate this remote working. So Bia today will talk about culture and values. And then the bonus that we talked about, we've got Cassandra Goodman, who I can see is on the webinar right now listening in. We'll push her into the video at 10 o'clock, and Cassandra's going to be talking about nourishing your wellbeing at this time. So we're really excited to bring her in to talk to us as well today. A couple of logistics: we will record the webinar as we have been, and we've got your emails, so we're sending those out to you. We're also posting the slides onto our website, and we're sharing that link with you as well. So the slides from today will be available there too. How we work it, down the bottom you will see Q&A. So if you have a question, please pop it into Q&A. We do also have chat. The chat is to talk to us or talk to each other. But do remember, if you have a question that you'd like to answer, please pop it into Q&A, because then everybody who's on the webinar can see it. And Katya and I will make sure that those questions get answered. So we're in day 3, as I said, and we're going to hand over to Bia right now, I would say. You ready, Bia?
Awesome, I'm ready. Okay, so we're going to talk about values and culture today. And we are going to explore 3 different levels. So we're going to talk about at the organizational level, what are the policies, people and processes we need to consider for remote working. Then we're the individual level. So what we all can do to shift our mindset to create value beyond the 9 to 5. So what is culture? So we normally talk about culture being the way things work around here. But then we are going to remove the here. So what happens when there is no here or there, but everywhere? Some of you might be working in different time zones, in different countries, in different states, at different times. We might be working parents with toddlers running around. You know, there might be different work modes for all of us. So what happens with our culture? So let's kick off. At the organizational level, we are going to consider a few things here. We're going to consider policies, our people, and our processes. I was going to include systems as well, but we covered systems on day 1 with Lisa, so I thought it wasn't needed, but systems is also something you need to consider if you are a leader, a CEO, a founder, people and culture, if you're leading a team. So let's talk about the formal stuff. So let's talk about the policies. So I wrote cracking the code of remote working without compromising your culture. So what can you do so that people are very aware of what they need to do, or how you roll, or how you're going to work as an organization when everyone is working from home? So I put 3 options here for you. You can create a policy, which could be temporary, and then once you go back to office work, you can essentially stop using that policy. Or it could be a policy that you can implement for the future, a working from home policy. As you can see on the right side, I've got a little arrow going up in terms of the formality. So policies are the most formal piece of document that you can put together. Number 2 is guidelines. So guidelines could be, you know, you have a strong vision of what you want to achieve with remote working, a vague idea of how it's going to work, and a strong focus on employee freedom. The Agile 11, at the Agile 11, we have a how we roll culture deck. And essentially it was created when we were 100% remote. So all our team members were working from home in different states and different locations. And then we were very explicit about some things like how to expense things. You know, how do you work when you don't have a lot on? So this is really interesting because it's not a formal policy document, but it still gives an idea of what you should do working remotely. And number 3 is principles. So this is an alternative if you are a small business or you don't know how to put a document together or a policy or guidelines. And it just gives, you know, what people need to know to work remotely. So why not focus on your top guiding principles? And I'm going to give an example on that. If you want to create a policy and you don't have one, These are the things you need to consider. And we're going to share with you post-webinar a couple of examples, one given by our law firm, Law Square. They are friends and partners in Melbourne, and they actually created a draft to be shared with anyone. So we're going to share it with you as well post-webinar. But essentially, what you need to consider is the why. So what is your purpose for your policy? And of course, health and safety is an obvious one right now. What is remote working? So what is it and what it isn't? A lot of organizations, they might be not talking about what it is, but it might be confusing for some employees. So you might need to make it explicit. Who is eligible as well? I know some organizations, especially with essential service like supermarkets and petrol stations, some employees, they still need to go to work. So who is eligible to working from home? And what are your roles and responsibilities? What is the organizational commitment to the employees? And what is the employees' responsibilities as well? And the how. How is this going to work? How is sick and annual leave going to work? What about OH&S? What about existing policies? So let's say anti-discrimination. It's an existing policy that should remain even if you're working remotely. So these are just some considerations about the how and how you're going to do that with your people. The resources I spoke about are going to be shared with you post-webinar, but it's essentially, we're putting an example from HubSpot, so it's not an Australian organization, and Law Square is an Australian law firm, and they drafted, I think it's a 2 or 3 page, so it's pretty simple and easy to use. Number 2 is all about guidelines. So if you don't with your guidelines. So essentially, they're not as formal, but they will give, an idea of what people should do. First of all, make them transparent. This is my tip. So make everything really clear. Focus on what matters for your people. So what type of work, how are they going to do it? Outline your purpose, vision, and values as an organization so that people are 100% clear of where you want to go as your vision, why you're doing what you're doing, and also your values to self-regulate your teams. And we're going to go into values when we talk about teams. Again, make the implicit explicit. A lot of CEOs and leaders and founders, they have this idea of how things should work. And they keep saying, this team here gets it, or my leadership team gets it, but the rest of the organization doesn't get it. So this is the time to download your brain and make sure everything is very explicit. Explain how things should work. So how to solve things, where to connect systems, be very clear again. And refer your people to any existing policies that you might have on your intranet. As I said before, anti-discrimination, OH&S, and etc. Number 3, guiding principles. So this is all about bringing agility to your remote workforce. And I really loved reading an article in the Inc. magazine. Jeff Hayden, he posted, here's everything you need to know for your guidelines for remote work. Get your work done, be available, and over-communicate. So if your organization doesn't want something formal, just go for guiding principles. Maybe you can copy this, and that's okay, as long as you are 100% in agreement. Let's talk about people, the most important part. So when we're moving to remote working, we are going to go through change. So a lot of people, they might be used to it, and some others, they might be struggling because they are very identified with going to work and going to their desk, and they might have pictures on their desk, and they have a routine and the commute. So this is a change management piece. So what we need to that our leaders and people in culture are prepared to support our people. Make sure you put some quick Zoom or Hangouts or Teams training calls with your leadership team to ensure that they know what to do remotely with your people. And make sure you're checking in constantly, especially with those people who kind of demonstrated a little bit of change resistance when going to work from home. Well-being, I'm not going to dig into that because I know Cassandra is going to talk about that at 9:30, but burnout and isolation are key challenges and really critical for you to consider in remote working due to the lack of interruptions. So it's so fascinating because Kayo mentioned in our webinar number 2, how you can block yourself some time in your calendar so that you can focus and do some work. But what if you have 0 interruptions and then you don't stop working at all? Especially your high performers, those that are working already a lot more, they might be tempted to work a little bit more without noticing. So just keep an eye on your people to ensure they're not doubling the amount of work just because they're home and comfortable, everything is around, and then they don't get up. KPIs. This is really interesting. And at the Agile 11, we talk a lot about KPIs because we believe that they should be outcomes focused and not output based. And I'm assuming that some of you might have KPIs based on the number of hours worked or the number of calls done. So essentially all about the output. So what happens when actually people are not coming to the office and not clocking in and clocking out? So perhaps you need to adjust your KPIs to your people as well. So the idea here is to focus on value and the outcomes you need to achieve. And I'm sure some of you are thinking about your KPIs right now. Let's move to process. Prioritizing what matters to enable agility. So you must be thinking about some must-have processes you have in your organization. So some of them, they need to remain, they're focused on compliance and safety, and we must keep them. So do not get rid of them. Other processes might need to be adapted. So think about your recruitment. You know, organizations that are actually selling more right now in times of change. So let's say producing toilet paper or online education service or online services. They might need to actually add people to their teams. So how do you recruit online? How do you recruit without doing the first and second round interviews? So there might be some things that you need to adapt to online. So have a think about those and perhaps type on the chat, you know, some of the processes in your organization that you need to adapt because it might inspire others as well. And what are the processes that you need to kill? And I know this is harsh language, but some processes might slow you down and will detract from changing working arrangements. So one of them, and I think Lisa touched very briefly in the systems webinar and technology, is lengthy procurement processes. So some processes might be too long, and you know, we are moving things so quickly now and everything is changing daily. So think about those processes that will not remain during these times of change. So let's move into teams. And let me know if I'm going too fast, and if you want to ask some questions. So how do teams ensure that culture doesn't suffer? All right, the party parrot is on now. This is an emoji the time. So I thought I'll bring our culture to this webinar so that we can show off a little bit of our culture ourselves. The idea here is prioritizing what matters to foster the right behaviors and facilitating trust. Values. So values are those actions and those behaviors that actually help our teams interact with each other, help us self-regulate in times of change, and even when everything is okay as well. So if your team doesn't have values, or if you're feeling a little bit worried about your team, or if your team is low on trust, this is the perfect time to create values. And you might have values that is just one word, integrity, or patience, or respect. But perhaps try to work on values that are more action-based, that are creating behaviors that you can role model and you can act those values every single day. And I'm going to show the Agile 11 values as well so that you're not worried about how to create them. But retain your values as well by signifying using quotes, images, GIFs, emojis, whatever makes sense to your team, and use those tools that Lisa showed on webinar 1 to actually help you with your culture. You know, the party parrot always comes on when we are celebrating something, when we are happy, when we are a little bit crazy, when we're a little bit intense. So we know what that means. So maybe you're going to incorporate the party parrot, but maybe you want something different. I don't know. So these are the Agile 11 values, just to give an example. Act like an owner, that's a really good one that we actually use every day. And I'm going to give an example when we, let's say, we spend money. In the business. So instead of going to get an approval process or ringing Eduardo every time we need to spend money, we just think about our value, act like an owner. So if the Agile 11 was my business, would I spend money on that? And how much should I spend? Especially because everything is so transparent at the Agile level. We know the revenue, we know the profitability. So I can make a call based on that value. So all the other values will give you an idea as well of how we roll and how we regulate each other every day. So if Martine wants to tell me something, but she's hesitating, I can just say, hey, no bullshit, you can tell me because we are a team. Martine, are you
And
having?
I tell her, yeah.
All right. We've got some tips for the teams here as well, and I'm calling them digital guidelines for remote and high-performing teams. The first one is find the best time as a team to meet online. So at the Agile 11, for instance, we have stand-ups every Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. This is the best time for us. And we had to kind of agree what the best time was. You know, you might be working at different times, and that's what we are calling asynchronous work. But at one stage during the week, you need to come together. So what is
Bia, your connection is just dropping out just a little bit there.
Okay, we might pick it up for Bia until she can come back in. So,
has anyone seen this bug before?
Are you back, Bia? Oh, she's back.
she's back.
Yeah, you're back. You're back. Well done.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what to do. All right.
I think we're agreeing the best way to give feedback remotely, Bia.
Yes, thank you. So feedback is something that we need to always continue. So it's not because you're working remotely that you're going to stop that, especially for leaders as well. Oh, I'm going to stop my one-on-ones, or I'm going to stop telling people, you know, if they're doing things right, you know. No, that shouldn't stop. It's business as usual when it comes to feedback. And you can also give feedback on processes and projects as well. I was reading the other day that Zapier, they have a really amazing way to actually give feedback on a project. So they created a safe word if a project is derailing, and the safe word is pomegranate. And they've even created an emoji with the pomegranate. So, you know, if you're chatting on Slack or Teams or, you know, WhatsApp or whatever it is, and you're like, you know, oh, I'm not quite sure about this project, or I'm really worried about the deadline or this, they just post the emoji pomegranate. And that's that safe word to indicate they need to catch up, they need to have a one-on-one, they have to have a team meeting to actually see what's happening with that project. So why not create something for your team? But remember, you can always pick up the phone as well. It's not because we are working remotely that we can't go back to the old school phone. Another point here, it's hard to stay in sync. So check in with your co-workers to schedule one-on-ones that otherwise would happen when walking past their desk. And finally, don't assume anything. Ask and be explicit, over-communicate. And I can't over-communicate that enough. So I'll keep talking about clarity and being explicit. Okay, the weight. So you might post something today on Slack or Teams or, you know, whatever tool you've got, different time zones, different times, and you're waiting for a response. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, am I doing something wrong? People don't like what I posted, or they don't like my project, they don't like my piece of work. No, again, you're assuming things, but people are working different times. People might be at the bathroom. People might be grabbing a cup of coffee. You know, they might not be able to respond to you straight away. Be patient. But if it's urgent, schedule a 10-minute video call to decide something and keep the work moving. And lastly, have fun. You don't need the beanbags in the office. You don't need the table tennis to create a true culture for your team. You know, so what do you do in that situation? Create some social things. And tomorrow we're going to talk about, you know, how to stay connected as a team. So I'm not going to go into that. Okay, we are moving to the individual now. Oh, I went too far. I went too far. What's going on? Sorry, guys. I'm the only person who did that. Anyway, so what is the mindset to get me going while working remotely? And, you know, I'm sure this is going to be relevant for all of us. We're all thinking about this. We all have to adapt. We all have to change. So I put this slide there because I've been hearing so much online about don't dress this way when you're working remotely. Don't eat while you're having meetings with your coworkers. Don't do this. Don't grab a cup of coffee. Don't have interruptions. Don't have this. And I think work is life. You know, there's no separation between work and your life. You shouldn't have a beer from the Agile 11 and a beer from home. So, you know, I don't know, maybe my dog is going to bark and you have to hear my dog barking. Of course, we want to minimize interruptions, but bring your child or pet to virtual calls. It's okay to have a snack while having a session. You know, sometimes we bring our lunch to physical meetings. So what's the difference with the online meetings? Don't hide your life just because you're working from home, unless, of course, there is something private, or maybe my partner is walking naked behind me. That's not cool. You know, but unless this is happening, and he's not there, he's not there, guys. Unless this is happening, you know, what's the big deal? And that's why I wanted to put a photo with me and my dog, and her name is Aya, by the way. A shifting mindset. So work is not a location, and work is not the time you work. Yeah. So I want you to now think for yourselves and ask the question, how am I adding value to my team and my organization? So I would love for you to text on the chat and respond to that question. How am I adding value to my team and my organization? It's not about the hours. It's not about the 9 to 5. It's not about where you are. So write down what value you are creating for your organization. Have a 30-second moment. Embrace freedom and accountability. Find the best time for you to work without compromising the team. So if you have kids and you need to put them to bed, and the best time for you to work is at 7, 8 o'clock at night, go for it. As long as there's no deadline, as long as, you know, your team is fine with that, and as long as you have those kind of digital norms together and your values, you know, it should be fine. So work shouldn't have to happen at the same time for everyone. More tips from us, because we've been working remotely for the past 5 years. Ensure you have a routine. So I wake up, you know, at 6 a.m. every day, and I have my exercise at 7 a.m. So if you have a daily routine, you know, just do it. Dress up, go and do your exercise at home. If you normally go to a cafe at 10:30 a.m., why don't you stop at 10:30 to make yourself a cup of coffee? You know, so do whatever works for you, but do it now from home. Schedule some me time. So find time for a walk, yoga, meditation, pet cuddles, whatever tickles your fancy, but book it in your calendar. If you don't book in your calendar, I promise you, it's not going to work, because you're going to keep working, and because you're at home and you can walk around, you're going to forget. And the mute button is there for a reason, but for when your environment is noisy. Again, if my dogs start barking, yeah, it's going to be disruptive. So we don't want to be so disruptive. But if it's just one bark and she stops, that's okay. Radio silence in meetings is no good. So when we are in physical meetings, we are all talking. There is noise in the background from the office. It's normal. So embrace that and try not to be on mute the whole time, because then it's just one person talking. And I thought this was really funny, so I had to post this here in this slide. So Martine, she shared on Slack the other day this pro tip for couples suddenly working from home together. And I thought that was gold. You know, I think this is really good. Get yourselves an imaginary co-worker to blame things on. In our apartment, Cheryl keeps leaving her dirty water cups all over the place, and we really don't know what to do about her. So I'm calling my co-worker Richard, even though his name is Alex. Anyway, but Alex is fine. Apart from the time, Richard is fine, apart from the time when he's, you know, creating his smoothie, putting his smoothie together in the morning, and the blender is very noisy. But anyway, so manage your home office and co-workers. So try to find a time when you're not having calls at the same time, you're not loud at the same time. So just manage your working environment at home. And set up your desk and work environment. I've got a really good setup here. I've got my computer, I've got my notebook, I've got my books, I've got a screen in front of me. So what is a work environment that will enable you to work better? So this is for you. And it's okay to work from the couch, but what is going to get you going? So I spoke a lot. So let's summarize everything before we pass on to Cassandra. Key things to remember: we all have a responsibility in living our culture remotely. As an organization, ask yourselves, how do you enable your teams and people to work better remotely? Policies are awesome, but you don't have to strive for perfection. Guidelines and guiding principles are okay too. Values are like gold, so keep them. Make sure you don't lose them. And find your groove when working remotely and be gentle with yourself and be prepared to unlearn what work truly means. So it's not a location, it's not the hours. And again, if all goes pear-shaped, remember your values.